Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. That means it's time for Longhorn Weekly, setting the table for the week to come on the 40 acres. And CJ, let's start with the big news that came out just before, while everybody was getting ready to start their week. Terry Joseph leaving the Texas staff, taking a job with the New Orleans Saints. This is the specific coach and the specific job that we had been mentioning at ontexasfootball.com. That was a possibility after Tashard Choice left for the Lions. We heard there was one more that we were monitoring. This was it. So, CJ, this move is official now. Let's look at Terry Joseph. We can get into what it means for the staff and how Sark moves on from here, which clearly this is one that he could anticipate was potentially coming. But, CJ, Terry Joseph's a coach that we were wondering, hey, what was his job status going to be after the 2023 season, especially after that Sugar Bowl where Michael Penix picked Texas apart. And now he's off to coach in the NFL after a tremendous 2024 season for that Texas secondary. What a difference a year can make, CJ.
Yeah, it's really funny how coaching works, right? Of course, about a year ago, some folks are calling for changes in the secondary, and a year after, well, oh, shoot, now both coaches are gone, right? Blake Gideon taking the Georgia Tech defensive coordinator job, Terry Joseph now going to the Saints as well, both in theory, right, in title, taking the step up after what I think most Texas fans were calling a hot seat year for both of them. So to parlay what was a really strong 2024 season into a new job at a higher level, congrats to Terry Joseph first and foremost. But this will continue the theme, Jeff, of Sarkisian needing to re-bolster his staff. And he's already had to do that with his running backs coach. He had to go find a new corners coach with Mark Orfe already. But to go out there and now find a new safeties or pass game coordinator coach is going to be at the top of the docket for him. It's going to be a trend, I think. And I know Texas fans might not want to hear it, but I think this is going to be something that is going to be a recurring theme over the next couple of years as Sark continues to win on the field and see coaches, kind of develop and promote themselves into new jobs moving forward.
You look at most of the dynasty-ish programs we've seen in probably the last 20 to 25 years in college football. Obviously, Nick Saban at Alabama, but Kirby Smart at Georgia, Urban Meyer at Ohio State, and to an extent, his time in Florida, Pete Carroll at USC, and to a lesser extent, Mac Brown at Texas. When you have success, elite-level success, people are going to want to poach your coaches.
Right.
And that's just something, look, that's one reason why Nick Saban was able to sustain the Alabama dynasty, among the many reasons. But one reason was, I think we really underestimated and underappreciated Nick Saban's ability to identify, hire, and develop really good football coaches. And CJ, in that vein, when we look at this Texas staff, when Nick Saban retired, everybody was wondering, hey, who's going to be the next guy that has that coach's car wash that Nick Saban was so famous for at Alabama, kind of the second chance view, if you will, for assistant coaches, whether it was Sark, Lane Kiffin, Mike Locksley, Mario Cristobal, Butch Jones, a lot of guys kind of rehabilitated their professional lives working for Nick Saban. And maybe we missed the boat, CJ, because maybe it's not that. Maybe Sark is setting the trend of hiring really good analyst-type guys that are going to go on to bigger and better. Stay in the secondary. Joey Thomas and Henry Fernandez, we heard those two guys were really integral parts of teaching the technical aspect of secondary play to some of the defensive backs on campus. Those guys are now full-time on-field FBS coaches. So maybe a guy like Kenoto Hudson, who's been a college secondary coach. He was at Ole Miss. He was at Illinois with Lovie Smith. Before that, he was a defensive administrative assistant at USC under Lane Kiffin and Sark. He's worked with Ed Orgeron, Clancy Pendergast, a lot of really good. Justin Wilcox is one of the best defensive minds in college football. A lot of really good defensive minds. Kenoto Hudson's been around. And a younger guy who's in a way kind of rehabilitating his professional career right after the Ole Miss thing doesn't work out. You're an analyst at Texas. Now you're coaching Nichols. CJ, I'm not saying Kenoto Hudson's going to one-for-one replace Terry Joseph, but whether it's Justin Garrett, the assistant running backs coach, Mike Bimonte getting promoted to assistant quarterbacks coach, it seems like Sark is has made Texas kind of this new place of, hey, come here, get your feet wet, and then you can go on to really launch your coaching career from here.
Yeah, it does feel like that's kind of becoming the case, and that's kind of what you hope, right? And for Texas specifically, look, we talked about staff continuity earlier in the year. head coach, both coordinators, Jeff Banks, who's really kind of that second man to Coach Sarkisian as well, but also Torrey Beckton, right? You keep those 5 and you'll be able to have the infrastructure in place for your program to withstand, some of these, departures, if you will. So I'm all for it. And again, to your point, Jeff, I think another name that we should be mentioning, or at least be monitoring Sarkisian going out and hiring analysts, is Alan Clark out of Ohio State, right? To come in, get a younger guy, come coach the edges. Maybe you'll develop into a front 7 coach. Maybe you'll move to a full linebacker group. We'll see, right? Obviously, you have to follow the career paths individually, but to go out and target that level of coach or that level of career path and say, yes, I see something in you. Now it's up to me, my staff, to bring it all the way out of you. I'm all for it, but it's going to be really interesting. Again, this is going to be the most staff turnover that Texas has experienced from, its top assistant level since Sarkisian arrived. What can you do with those 5 pillars that I mentioned with Sarkisian, Flood, Banks, PK, and Becton? Well, this is going to be their biggest test. And, well, I think that's the other conversation we're going to have, Jeff, is when spring football comes around, how quickly are you able to implement just the system with these new coaches, but also with about 25 early enrollees as well?
Yeah, and I like the potential it has. Look, even if those guys, the analysts that have gotten promoted or guys that were analysts at other places that have come to Texas, even if they don't go on to other FBS jobs, let's say AJ Milwee takes a play calling gig after the 2025 season. All right, maybe Mike Bamonte at that point is ready to be the quarterback's coach. If Chad Scott were to get an opportunity, I know he just got to Texas, and we'll get to Chad Scott a little more in a minute. But let's say Chad Scott moves on after 2025, gets an opportunity he can't turn down. Okay, well, Justin Garrett's the assistant running backs coach. Maybe in a year or two, he's ready to be your full-time running backs coach. So really, you're developing assistant coaches to come take those jobs. So, hey, I don't have to worry about finding the next Tashard Choice or the next Bo Davis or whoever, because I've got those guys in my program already, learning from those guys. So it could be more of a seamless transition. Let's get to Chad Scott. Before we do, CJ, got to remind everybody, get over to ontexasfootball.com. Use the promo code OTFOG. OTFOG gets you $49.95 for an entire year of access to ontexasfootball.com. There it is on the screen. OTFOG is your promo code, $49.95 for 1 year of access at ontexasfootball.com. If you're a member at ontexasfootball.com, you got some of CJ's recruiting news, notes, and nuggets over the weekend. CJ, Chad Scott's doing work. He's reached out to Javian Osborne, even reached out to Derek Cooper, the number 1 ranked running back prospect in the country. I know you confirmed that he's had some contact with Chad Scott. Where's running back recruiting at right now, CJ? Because I know we saw Xavier Crowell wasn't going to visit Texas. Now he's going to visit Texas again after the contact with Chad Scott. That would lead me to believe. Plus, Jerry's reported that Texas is still in it with Javian Osborne. You mentioned things with Derek Cooper. They're still, we'll call it a little bit warm right now. It seems like Chad Scott, at least the early reviews have been pretty good for him as he and the other new coaches kind of get their feet wet and continue to establish recruiting relationships as members of the Texas staff.
Yeah, for Chad Scott specifically, I think he understands the importance of running backs in this offense and, kind of the pull that the University of Texas combined with the Steve Sarkisian offense will have in recruiting, right? This is a very coveted job, or at least it was when it was open. There were college coaches from across the country basically calling anybody who would answer to say, what's the deal with this job? Mm-hmm. And so for him to get this job, he knows he's got to get off to a quick start. And what does that mean right now? Well, for me, at least, it's setting these official visits. Be in a position where, hey, if you have a weekend open sometime in June, you're coming to Texas. And I think he's doing just fine right now. Of course, we'll monitor KJ Edwards and when his official visit to Texas will be, whether it be the 6th, 13th, or the 20th of June. He did get Xavier Crowell's official visit back on. That will be June 6th. Of course, that was a big deal almost about 30 minutes after Tashard Choice announced that he was headed to the Lions. Xavier Crowell said, no more visits to Texas for me. Well, Friday night, he got in contact with Chad Scott, and that official visit is back on. But I did reach out to Derek Cooper, the number 1 running back in the country out of Chaminade Madonna out in Florida. He said right away, yeah, Chad Scott took the Texas job, and next thing you know, he was on the phone with me. And that's a big one, Jeff. That's the number 1 running back in all of the 2026 class. Tashard Choice actually stopped by Chaminade Madonna to see Derek Cooper in person late January. So Texas, of course, wanted to go after Javian Osborne, KJ Edwards on the in-state front, but always keeping an eye out on the out-of-state. And that's also Amari Latimer, who will continue to monitor. I mentioned Xavier Crowell, but Cooper was that big one. And I think Texas wanted to go back out to Florida to grab one of those big-time running backs, and you can't get much bigger than the number one back in the country. We'll see, of course, when that official visit will be set. Right now, officials to Auburn, Alabama, Georgia are in place right now for Derek Cooper.
Yeah, Chaminade Madonna, that's the same program that produced Jeremiah Smith in the 2024 class. If you want to go down a huddle rabbit hole and just watch some really good prospect film, CJ, I don't know that there's a 2026 prospect that's got just better highlights than Derek Cooper. He's one of those 2-clip guys. It takes about 2 clips for okay, yeah, this guy's legit. Like it's some really dang good film.
No, it absolutely is. He's one of those guys that gets like the NIL deal before college, and it's just Huddle saying thank you for bringing so much traffic to our site. So he's a heck of a football player.
Well, CJ, speaking of traffic and travels, I hope you didn't put the parka away after the cold weather we had in Austin, because you're going to get a dose of it, my friend, going to Indianapolis in the Combine. I know we talked heavy Combine last week on Longhorn Weekly, so I'll just ask you this. Of the day 3 type guys, priority free agent type guys, and we know which guys there are in the Texas draft class among the 14 Longhorns who are ahead of the Combine, which one of those day 3 type guys do you think could kind of elevate themselves into maybe that early day 3, maybe even that day 2 mix, but definitely they've got a chance to really help themselves in Indy?
Yeah, this is an interesting draft because you mentioned 14 guys being invited to the Combine. I think 9 or 10 of them are expecting to hear their name called within the first 4 rounds. And that's a little bit different from last year where Texas had 11 guys sent to the Combine. There were probably 3 or 4 wondering if they'll hear their name at all, right? The Ryan Watts, the Keelan Robinsons, you start hearing some of those names in the back end. They did hear their name in the back end, and that was great. But this year it's a little bit different. So I look at Vernon Broughton. I say that because, look, I think the film for him in pass rush was very good. But what else can the NFL kind of uncover or feel like they can develop at the next level in the run game? That's a big part of the game, obviously. But look, no Senior Bowl, hasn't necessarily done a whole lot since the 16-game season for NFL scouts. Now, he's been working behind the scenes, obviously. This is a heavy interior defensive line draft as well. But what can he do to come out there and continue the trend of Keandre Coburn, Moro Ojimo, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy? We know Alfred Collins is going to be drafted, but where can you expect to hear Vernon Broughton's name after this weekend? That's going to be really encouraging for me, at least. I'll have my eye on him in Indianapolis. But I'll pose this question to you because, look, Texas has 4 offensive linemen going to the draft. Oklahoma has 3 players going to the draft. We're expecting 3 of those guys to be drafted for sure. What can a Hayden Connor do at the Combine this year that could spark some interest and maybe hear his name called as well?
Yeah, I think Hayden Connor, to me, and Jake Majors are, to a lesser extent, in the same group that Barron Sorrell and Andrew Makuba are in. I'm fascinated, CJ, every draft by, like, I'm a Cowboys fan, unfortunately, first and foremost. But every year when the draft rolls around, I want to know what the Baltimore Ravens do. Because whether it's Ozzie Newsome or Eric DeCosta, the Ravens just have this tendency to just draft really good ball players, guys that had a lot of experience and a lot of production at power conference programs. And I look at Barron Sorrell and Andrew Makuba both, and I'm like, man, those are the kind of guys that the Ravens would take, right? Yeah. Multiple year starters at major conference programs. Makuba showed, hey, when he's healthy, he's a legit NFL type guy. I think those guys, and you look at the other organizations that do that, right? They just look for big school guys, productive guys. The Lions, under Dan Campbell's leadership, they do that. The Steelers traditionally do that. The Green Bay Packers have been really good about that. Those types of organizations, I think those organizations in their 3rd, 4th round range, I think they're going to have a really hard time, depending on what their needs are, passing on guys like Barron Sorrell and Andrew Makuba. And I mentioned Hayden Connor and Jake Majors in that same vein, CJ, because I think, like those guys, again, offensive line, it's tough to gauge production, but I think in terms of how they're going to interview, their experience level, and the fact that they did it, they were productive players at a big-time program like Texas, I think those guys are going to help themselves maybe get on somebody's priority free agent board, or if they were already on a priority free agent board, maybe they get a couple of organizations to say, you know what, with Jake Majors, we're really thinking about taking a center in this draft. I don't think he's going to make it to free agency. Maybe we use a 6th round pick on it.
Right.
Because at that point, your 6th, 7th round picks and priority free agents are pretty much the same players, right? Guys that may or may not make your roster, guys that you may stash away on the practice squad. I could see them maybe somebody stashing away Jake Majors on the practice squad. I think Hayden Connor is going to be a guy that might be hard to cut for a team because he's so smart. He's such a team guy. And I think a guy that's just dedicated to his craft. CJ, back when he was a prospect, you looked at his body, and I know I want to talk about somebody's body, but I was like, man, I just wonder if Hayden Connor's ever going to play at Texas. I don't know that I've seen a prospect change their body for the better from the time they committed to Texas to the time they got to campus. And Hayden Connor was one of those guys that just kept working and working and working. I think all three of those guys, let's take Makuba out because he wasn't a Texas recruit, but Jake Majors, Hayden Connor, and Barron Sorrell, I think those guys are really good for Texas because you talk about those three guys, I think got everything out of what God gave them during their time at Texas. They didn't leave anything on the field. The development piece was there for all of them. They were willing to work. So I'm excited about those three guys, and I'll throw Makuba in there as well. Those four guys, I think those guys are going to kill it. Maybe not even with the workouts, but off the field when they interview, I think they're going to get high marks from teams.
Yeah, and look, that's just as much development as the on-field, right? Being able to sit there in front of a whiteboard and kind of diagnose why, what, and where they're going on a single snap in front of scouts, that's pretty important. And in this situation at the combine, they're going to be tested just like that. I wanted to go back to your point about the offensive line and how valuable snaps are and how valuable playing multiple years at a high-level program is. Christian Jones just a year ago, right? I think he played his way into an NFL draft pick. Obviously, he got picked in the 5th round by the Cardinals, but I think that was about the ultimate ceiling that we all expected for his career at Texas, especially early on. And credit to Coach Flood to get these guys to where they are for being in the conversation of NFL draft picks. But yeah, I think without a doubt, Christian Jones is kind of that blueprint of, okay, new staff comes in, Coach Flood kind of teaches him the ropes. Within 2 years, he's a 5th round guy without, I don't think really many ever expecting that his name would be called in the draft. But right. Corey Becton deserves some credit for getting those bodies in shape, of course. But Coach Flood, I mean, that's another feather in the cap for what has been a really stellar developmental career as well.
And depending on, how a senior year goes for DJ Campbell and Cole Hudson, or, hey, if Trevor Gooseby kills it in 2025, he is draft eligible as a third-year sophomore. This helps those guys, CJ, because I think at that point, NFL scouts start to say, hey, what's going on in that Texas O-line room? Because every year their guys seem to get better, and maybe we underestimate them at draft time. So just something to watch. Hey, I love the fact that we're talking about the Texas offensive line and the draft for good reasons. Not talking about bad reasons anymore. And we're talking about Texas in the draft and the combine for good reasons, not bad reasons anymore.
There's going to be a long drought that ends after this year too. So another reason to celebrate.
Yes. I will no longer have to say that I was a senior in high school the last time Texas had an offensive lineman selected in the 1st round. Yes. Drew Bledsoe was the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. Tom Brady was going into year 2 as a starter with the New England Patriots the last time Texas had a 1st round draft pick on the offensive line. 2002, CJ, was a long time ago. So yes, Kelvin Banks in the year of our Lord 2025 will end that streak. CJ, stay warm in Indy. Hopefully you find you some good food up there and make the most of your time in Indy. You can follow CJ on the social media, but he'll have a lot at ontexasfootball.com from the combine. You can also find myself, Jerry Hamilton, Bobby Burton, Blake Monroe. All of our work is at ontexasfootball.com. And if you get there right now, use the promo code OTFOG. You get $49.95 for 1 year of access to ontexasfootball.com. You are not going to want to miss anything going on through the spring, the summer with CJ this June. In terms of the number of official visitors, the traffic going in and out of Moncrief, it's going to be a massive summer for recruiting. And then obviously we get to year 2 in the SEC, year 1 of Arch Manning as the full-time starter. You're not going to want to miss a minute of it. So get over to ontexasfootball.com right now and stay locked into the channel. Look, baseball, women's basketball, a huge, colossal week for men's basketball after the disaster against South Carolina on Saturday. It's a massive week on the 40 acres, and we will have you covered here on the channel and at ontexasfootball.com. For CJ Vogel, I'm Jeff Howe. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, welcome.